the checkout line of the local grocery store in the hometown I left behind. I tried to keep my eyes forward and avoid eye contact as I paid for my frozen dinner and hoped to get out of Dodge before I had to talk to someone I knew but hadn't talked to in 15 years. "James," I heard a woman's voice chime from behind me. I couldn't help but utter the word damn, drawing a grin from the high school-age checkout girl. I put the smallest smile humanly possible on my face and looked over my shoulder to see a woman with a poof of gray hair standing at my hip with an armful of groceries sloppily spread across the chest of the dirty Garfield Christmas sweatshirt she wore in September. I don't think I had actually seen the woman since I was 9 years old, but I instantly recognized her as Barbara, the woman who ran the daycare I went to when I was very young. I stuck my credit card in the machine and started the process of paying for my groceries. Before I spoke, Barbara's cracked lips spread into a wide smile across her wrinkled face. "Yeah, I can't believe you've grown into. When I watched you, you were this tall," Barbara said, and then held her hand flat at about the level of my waist. Yeah, people grow. It's true," I agreed in a manner I hope wasn't as snarky as it seems writing it out now. I let out a nervous chuckle and started to backpedal away from the checkout line. "Are you staying at your folks' place right now?" Barbara asked. "Yeah, I ran into your sister about 6 months ago. I'm so sorry to hear about your mom," Barbara went on. Barbara ignored the cashier and stuck me with a hug before I could slip any further. I felt her bosom awkwardly smash up against my rib cage. "Thank you," I muttered. Barbara thankfully pulled away from me. "I told your sister I remembered 2 things about you. You walked on your toes for some reason, and you and your sister constantly talked about monsters a lot. You two were always really scared of bloody monsters." I couldn't get the second thing Barbara said out of my head. As I drove up the highway towards the house I grew up in and both my parents had died in within the past couple of years, I called up my sister. She didn't answer. She hadn't answered her phone in months. I don't know why I even kept trying. I left a voicemail. "It's Sam. I just ran into Barbara, the lady who ran our daycare, at the store, and she said something weird. She specifically mentioned we always talked about monsters and being scared of bloody monsters. Weird she specifically mentioned that, but I wanted to talk to you about it, see what you might have remembered. I kind of remember being scared a lot, but would never have thought it would be something enough for her to mention 15 years later. Call me back. Bye." I wrapped up my message just as I pulled up to the dirt driveway, which snaked up to my parents' house, and the tin mailbox, with our last name printed on it in big, sloppy white painted letters, which were so faded they could almost no longer be read. I expected to feel the familiar touch of dry paper envelopes when I stuck my arm in the mailbox, but instead brushed up against the stiff plastic of an unmarked VHS tape. My dead parents still had a VCR hooked up and ready to go in their living room. It ironically sat next to a DVD player I gave them about 20 Christmases ago they never set up. My fingertips started to sweat when I pushed the tape into the VCR, hit play, and looked up at the blue screen of the TV. I had no clue what I was about to watch. I took a deep breath when I saw the video open up to a grainy shot. I gulped that breath down when I immediately recognized the setting. The fake wood paneling of the playroom and Barbara's double-wide trailer, which housed her daycare, was unmistakable. I can still remember the box of her room, which was kept empty except for one basket of toys. All those years later, the stale, empty space still gave me a hollow feeling and tingle in my spine. The video cut back to blue again, then crackled back to life with a grainy image of myself, probably 7, dressed in teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles pajamas, and a bowl cut with a cowlick which sat atop a melon head, which was too big for my skinny body. "What's your name?" A groggy male voice I remembered as belonging to Barbara's husband Dale asked my younger self as I looked away from the camera. "James," the younger me mumbled on the camera, and winced against the sharp lighting which shone in my face. The camera quickly zoomed out and panned a little to the right to reveal my sister Mandy standing next to me in Little Mermaid pajamas. "And what's your name?" Dale asked. Mandy took a little longer to answer. She quivered, appeared on the verge of tears. I took some time to take in the setting again. Out the window behind both of our little bodies, I could see it was night. Yet, I had no memory of ever being at Barbara's daycare at night. Mandy, the word barely dribbled out of my sister's pursed lips. I heard a woman's voice mutter something I couldn't make out off the camera, and then the room went dark. I could now just barely see the outlines of my sister and myself in the almost complete blackness. The sounds of myself and my sister beginning to cry filled the darkness for a few seconds before being drowned out by the sound of a quick shake of the entire room. It sounded like someone had thrown down a basketball on the floor as hard as they could, and then caught it on its way back up. Then again, the crying sounds got louder. There it is, the woman's voice off camera got a little louder, and I was able to identify it as belonging to Barbara. Please, no, my sister cried out. One more thud sound reverberated through the room, followed by a few seconds of silence, and then a horrible screeching sound of a siren rang out. The screeching siren went for a few seconds, and then came to an abrupt stop. The lights flicked on, and Mandy and I stood in our same spots, panting and trying to catch our breath. The thud sound returned. This time, the thud sent my sister and I flying into opposite corners of the room. We each hit the fake wood wall hard and crashed down to the ground. Stop, we gotta stop. Barbara's voice yelled out from off camera. I saw a younger Barbara walk into frame for a second, and then the video cut out. The video came back on and changed to a close-up shot of Barbara sitting in a chair in the blank playroom, with her plume of blonde hair done up in spectacular fashion, and her cheeks rouged. She looked like she was doing one of those old video dating personals from the early 90s. My name is Barbara Daniels. I am from Adams Grove, Oklahoma, and I believe we have discovered paranormal powers in our home manifesting themselves in the bodies of 2 young siblings who attend our daycare. What you will see on this videotape is either a spirit or the work of a demon, some kind of poltergeist, and we would like to request the supernatural advocates come to our home in Adams Grove and help us in an episode to figure out what is happening with these children. Barbara stopped for a moment to collect herself. Can you please explain the situation with the kids? Dale asked from behind the camera. The children are ages 7 and 10 and attend my daycare. These episodes start when they fall asleep in the night and they wake up in a daze before they fall asleep again shortly after. After they wake up, they seem to have absolutely no memory of what happened. However, they constantly talk about how they are scared of the monsters and the bloody monsters, though they do not have many details about what these monsters are. We made these tapes to show what is happening to these kids in hopes they can get the help it appears their parents don't want them to get before something bad happens. The video opened again with Mandy and I standing in the room in our cartoon pajamas trembling. Barbara walked into frame and put her hands on each of our shoulders. We're right here, Barbara said so quietly the camera barely picked it up. This is the last time. Barbara got back behind the camera. The lights flicked on and off in the time it took for her to get out of the shot. The thud sound from the earlier footage began again, and the room shook. The younger me dropped to the floor and stuck his face into the carpet. Mandy just kept staring at the camera, seemingly frozen. Another thud. Mandy dropped to the ground like a bomb went off. Screw you, Mandy screamed at the camera. I'll kill you, she screamed again, and her voice seemed to drop about 10 octaves. Has this happened before? Dale asked quietly from behind the camera. No answer from Barbara. You're a cheater. Mike Blake is a cheater, and everyone needs to know it. You probably have herpes now, or something from her. Mandy took a few defiant steps towards the camera and pointed a flex finger at the lens with hate burning in her eyes. Who is Mike Blake? Dale asked. Again, no answer from Barbara. I knew the answer to the question. Mike Blake was my sister's soon-to-be ex-husband she broke up with because he was cheating with a bar woman from town. Mandy collapsed onto the floor on the screen, and younger me rose to my feet at just the same time, as the lights started flickering every half second the way they do when you take the light switch and turn it on and off as fast as you can. Then the video cut out. I wasn't going to waste time with a call now. I got back into my truck and drove straight to Mandy's house on the other end of town. Much like my parents, Mandy lived down a long, muddy private driveway which snaked off the highway and led up to a large, but worn down and rustic house at the top of a steep hill. A pack of filthy dogs announced my arrival when I pulled into her gravel driveway and looked up at her house as a thick stream of smoke billowed out the chimney and into the tall trees. The dogs nipped at the dirty cuffs of my jeans when I walked up to the porch and noticed there didn't seem to be a light on anywhere on the property despite the fading sunset and near darkness of the woods around the home. The only light I was able to see came from a candle lit in the window of the living room, which sat next to the front door. I knocked softly on the wooden front door with my eyes stuck on the living room window. I noticed a breeze walk by the lit wick of the candle a few moments after my knock. I held my breath as I listened to footsteps approach the door on the other side. I was shocked by what greeted me when the door opened. I recognized Mandy, but it looked as if she was wearing some kind of Hollywood special effect makeup, which made her look like a real-life witch, wrinkled and just slightly hued yellow. Her skin looked like that of an 80-year-old dying woman's, not that of a woman just in her early 30s. Her eyes were sunken in her skull like a shrunken head, and her hair was a tangled rat's nest on the edge of dreadlocking. "You shouldn't have talked to her," Mandy said before I could get a word out. "You got my message." "You shouldn't have talked to her," Mandy repeated. Mandy waved me into the darkness inside her home and shut the door behind me. The house was as cold as it was dark. I shivered through my winter coat when I followed Mandy into the candle-lit living room. I took a seat on the dewy couch in front of a coffee table littered with dirty dishes and dirty laundry. "It's freezing in here," I muttered through clenched teeth. I looked across the room to see Mandy offering me a cigarette from her seat in a stained easy chair. "No thanks," I said with a shake of the head and took the VHS tape out of my jacket pocket. "You shouldn't have talked to her," Mandy cut me off and eyed the tape. "And I've seen that tape too. She gave that video to me. She must have copies or something at Barbara's house." The lights going on and off, us flying around the room and talking about horrible things that happened later in life. I asked. "Yes, what the hell is that?" I asked. Mandy lit up another cigarette. "You know that thing Barbara told you about us always talking about monsters? That was the monsters on that tape. She told me something where we had to stay the night there, and they noticed we had night terrors and these poltergeist abilities, and they recorded it to try and get us on some show where some experts would try to help us, but they ended up never sending in the tapes. I told her to get lost, but regardless, we're both screwed. I think talking about it made the monsters come back." One of Mandy's cigarettes started to sound really good. I couldn't really remember the monsters or ever really thought about them until I ran into Barbara at the deli. "I think they are probably coming back for you too. They terrorized us as kids. I keep seeing this horrible, dead-looking man all around the house," Mandy explained. "What are they?" "The monsters," I asked. "They seem to change, but they come when you try to go to sleep and they hide in the shadows, cling to the corners, closets, where it is dark. I don't actually get a good look at them much, but they seem to just look like hideous people. The one I see the most is this guy covered in blood." The images started to come back to me just a little bit, like the mismatched puzzle pieces of a night of blackout drinking might after weeks pass. I could picture myself waking up in the middle of the night in my parents' house, tiptoeing in the dark on the way to the bathroom or Mandy's room to seek shelter, and seeing the shadows down the hall or behind the shower curtain or shaking the doors of my closet. I suddenly felt as if the monsters were crawling all over the room. The childhood fear which paralyzed my every step once the sun went down started to come back. My panicked eyes scanned the room, looking for them. I saw none, but I felt them. "If these things work in the dark, then why don't you have any lights on?" I asked. "You try paying electricity bills when you can't sleep and your piece of trash husband leaves you alone." They shut the power off. Mandy finally seemed to show some energy when she spoke. "What are we going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," Mandy mumbled. "Should we go to Barbara with the tapes?" I asked. Barbara's house was exactly the same, raised double wide with brown and tan paint, and a wooden deck raised up off the ground level, and a big tool shed. I almost felt like I had traveled back in time just going to the place. Barbara gave us a frazzled look when she saw us standing on her porch. She followed it up with one of those looks someone gives when they pretend to be excited to randomly bump into someone, but are actually horrified about it. You could see the breath get sucked out of her in an instant. "Oh hi," Barbara spoke after a few frenzied seconds. "Do you want to come in? Here's fine." I whipped the VHS tape out of my jacket pocket and pushed it in her face. "What is this?" "That's the tape we made for the Paranormal Help show," Why did you stick it in our mailbox? I cut off Barbara. I didn't put that in your mailbox, Barbara said defensively. The gears started to turn in my head. She was telling the truth. Barbara was behind me in line at the store when I bumped into her, and I went directly to my truck and raced to my parents right after that. There was no way she got that tape into the mailbox after we talked. I admit, Barbara going on broke me out of my thought process. I took that video, but I gave it to your grandmother years ago, both tapes. My father's mother was a very complicated topic and figure in our lives. I vaguely remember her as a steady presence in our lives. In my very first memories, a rail thin woman with long red hair and pale skin, I seem to remember her always giving me really good salty, sweet cookies that she made, so I thought she was pretty cool. Then, suddenly, she was completely out of our lives. No Thanksgiving, no Christmas, no birthdays, no weddings, funerals, just gone, without any explanation from either of my parents. It was like she had never even existed. I didn't think about my grandma after she disappeared until high school, when Mandy told me she found out our grandma was the person who ran the psychic business along the highway a few towns over. I thought about dropping in there for years, but I never did. I figured it was time to finally pay that palm reader by the highway a visit. The red and purple neon sign I remembered still buzzed in the window of the little house on the edge of the little village of Branchford. It was nearly 9, but the sign still burned the word open into the night. You think she's still alive? Mandy asked. As we sat in the truck, looking at the house, Mom and Dad are already dead. They died super young. I think she's only like in her late 70s or something. We'll just have to find out, I guess, I answered. They walked up to the door and pressed an electronic doorbell. Classical chimes rang out from inside of the home. The door opened before the chimes stopped, and we came face to face with the grandma we hadn't seen in more than 20 years. Her long red hair was shorter and had turned gray, and her face was a lot less sharp, but it was definitely her. I knew you were coming, Grandma said before ushering us in. Grandma sat us down in her fortune-telling, palm-reading room and poured us cups of hot tea without asking if we wanted them. You watched the tapes, my grandma said once we all sat down on deep purple furniture. Yeah, look, I don't know what happened between you and Mom and Dad, but I don't care. I just want to know what this is and what we can do about it, I explained. I don't want to end up like her, I finished, and pointed to Mandy. My grandma took a deep breath and started in. It's a lot more simple than you might think. When you two were young, I started to notice you had some of the psychic abilities I have. The two of you could see things that hadn't happened yet, or see people in places before they were there, or in states, ages they had not appeared yet. Your parents wanted to put you in therapy, but I knew the only true way you could get through it all was to understand it. I tried to tell your parents that, but they wouldn't have any of it. They just put you straight in therapy to block it all out, and it worked for a long time. I instead tried to work with your babysitter, who was a client, and it started to work, but your parents found out. Then they cut me off. I had to wait until they died to reach back out to you about it. And it is good timing, because I can tell your powers have come back, and they only come back in this way when something very big is about to happen, something the power wants to tell you about. Now what? I asked. My grandma's face lit up. You need to come back. I can explain to you that what you might think are monsters are not really monsters at all. They are probably just people you know flashing before you at different stages, moments of their lives that you will see. You need to be prepared for the night visions experienced on those tapes as well, because they are coming back. Okay, great, I said sarcastically. I know my vision. It's me, getting on my flight back to Houston tomorrow with a good night's sleep. I got up and Mandy followed me out the door. Grandma stumbled after us with tears in her eyes. You have to come back. I feel something very big coming, my grandma pleaded from her open doorway. Mandy and I ignored Grandma. We walked out to my truck, got inside, and drove away. We pulled away with the tension sweating out of our pores and into the cramped cab of the single bench truck. Mandy wasn't talking, but I sensed she may have thought I made the wrong decision. I reached over and turned on the radio to try and cut through the animosity in the air. All that came out of the speakers was static. I scanned through more stations. Nothing but static. I stopped the dial when I finally reached a station which had sound. The nasally drone of a newscaster speaking in a monotone leaked out the blown speakers. Tornado warnings have been issued for Shelby, Brockton, and Ogden counties. Residents are advised to seek shelter immediately, the newscaster's voice announced. The world outside had seemed to maintain an eerie calm all night, but I noticed the trees, which lined the highway, were swaying violently. Large piles of debris and shrubs were skating across the highway in front of us. A branch broke off a tree and landed in the bed of my truck with a hard thud. The world outside the truck had turned into complete chaos as we drove into the meager downtown of Branchford. A strangely familiar sound cut into my ears as I slowed the car next to an abandoned church. It was that siren screech from the VHS tape where my sister and I were in the playroom at Barbara's house. It was a tornado warning siren, bellowing from the fire station in the middle of the town. I parked the car in front of the church. "Come on," I screamed as loud as I could as I opened the door and let in a horrifying gust of wind. I pushed myself against the wind and out the door. I kept running until I reached the open front door of the church. On the ground of the church, I struggled to breathe and looked back out the open door, where I saw no sign of Mandy. I waited for about 5 seconds before I crawled over to the rows of wooden pews and tucked myself under the first one I could reach. I covered my head, clenched my teeth, and prayed the tornado would pass without killing me. I had survived tornadoes before growing up in Oklahoma, but had never been this close to one, and was sure I was going to die in the rickety church surrounded by abandoned Bibles and the guilt of leaving Mandy behind. Looking back now, the time I spent beneath the pew was probably only about 2 minutes, but the time crawled when I was there. Curled up, fighting against the wind felt like 2 hours. I at first thought I was going to be able to ride out the storm in the church, but then I felt my body lift up into the air. I felt myself soar through the air for a handful of seconds with my eyes shut tight before I crashed hard into the ground and opened my eyes. I was in the yard of the church facing where the church once stood. The faded white building had been reduced to a few scraps of wood and some pews which were flipped over on their side. The siren still rang out at ear-splitting volume, but I heard what is the most disgusting sound I have ever heard in my life. It sounded like someone coughing, sneezing, and barfing at the same time. I turned around to locate the noise and saw Mandy stumbling around the grass behind me, covered in blood which poured out of deep gashes on her forehead and neck. My heart stopped. I had seen this image before, but instead in the dark of my parents' house, inside my closet, when I opened it up to confront the monsters. The last images I had of my sister, stumbling around covered in blood from the tornado, trying not to die, was the image of the monster. The bleeding woman who haunted my childhood was Mandy, the bloody monster. I tried to scream out to Mandy over the roar of the siren, the blasts of the wind, and through my froggy throat, but I couldn't even hear myself scream. I just yelled in vain, until a coat of red blood washed over my eyes, and I passed out. I woke up in a hospital bed with every single atom in my body aching. I could barely breathe, but I was alive. There wasn't another soul in the room, just the lonely periodic beep of some machinery, my pain, and a little bit of light which came from the hallway through the open door. I survived. Mandy did not. I would find out later, that day, that she bled to death in front of what was left of the church. There was no one to help me pick up the pieces of what happened, but I was able to figure it out mostly on my own. The terrifying incident, that Mandy and I kept having playing out in the night Barbara caught on camera, was us seeing the future of the tornado incident, where Mandy would die, and I would almost die. The monsters we would see were each other, covered in blood, 20 years older, and not looking anything like people we would recognize when we were kids. Grandma was right. Her feeling that she needed to warn us was true. The visions had tried to prepare us to survive the most dangerous moment of our lives, but we weren't able to harness it because we weren't trained. My grandma would be the only person who would come visit me in the hospital the week I was there. She accepted my apologies and understood why I dismissed her at first. We never really talked about the visions or seeing into the future in the hospital. We mostly just bonded. She even brought me some of the amazing salted chocolate chip cookies she used to give to me as a kid on my last night in the hospital. We ate them and made plans for me to come back to her office and start working on properly handling my powers when I was ready. My usual work routine and life helped put me back at ease and heal for the first couple of weeks back in Houston, but it would not last. After about 2 weeks, the night visions from my childhood started to come back. At first they were mostly just feelings, or sounds, or a sense that someone was watching me, but things came to a stomach-turning head last night. I woke up because I felt the blanket pull off of my head, as if someone had tugged it back towards my feet. Having to pee, I got up out of bed and headed to the bathroom. Trying to keep myself from fully waking up, I didn't turn on the light, and the bathroom just started pissing in the near dark. Things were going smoothly, until I noticed a shadow, and heard the faint sound of something swaying behind the shower curtain. I clenched my teeth hard, and whipped open the shower curtain. Dangling from the shower head was the gray, naked corpse of my grandma, noose around her neck. I screamed and ran back to my bed before I was even finished going to the bathroom. I laid frozen until the sun came up. I started calling the number my grandma gave me, but I'm starting to get very worried because she hasn't answered any of my calls.